Hello and welcome to Newsnight. I am Ladi Akiridolale. It's our pleasure to have you join us today. The outgone week was a tough one for the country. First, Kaduna Airport was attacked by bandits or terrorists, leading, according to reports, to 2 deaths and a near aviation incident. Then, an Abuja-Kaduna train was also attacked by bandits using improvised explosive devices, leading to at least 8 deaths and scores of injuries, as well as an unknown number of passengers kidnapped. Another attack was launched on the very rail line that we're talking about the very next day. Then there was the attack on a Zaria housing estate, leading to the kidnap of a customs officer and his son, amongst others. In neighboring Niger State, at least 20 people were said to have drowned while fleeing from bandits. Why is there a focus on Kaduna State, and what can be done to safeguard citizens as well as critical infrastructure generally? What's the nexus between actionable and actioned intelligence and the capacity of security agencies to act quickly in these circumstances? For answers to this and other critical questions about Nigeria's security situation, Newsnight talks to security consultant, founder and chief executive of Beacon Consulting, Dr. Kabiru Adamu. Dr. Adamu, thank you for your time. Welcome to the program.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Ladi.
Let me begin from the revelation by the Kaduna State Governor, Malam Nasir El-Rufai, that before the attack on, the first attack that is, on the Kaduna train that we had, there was actionable intelligence which was passed on to the security forces, but that nothing was done before the attack actually happened. Does this, in your mind, speak to a lack of coordination in terms of use of actionable intelligence?
Yes, Ladi. It speaks volumes to the level of accountability and responsibility that certain government departments have. What we've heard from the executive governor of Kaduna State is that he did release, the government did write a letter to the Railway Corporation advising them to suspend the train services at night. And for a governor to make such a public statement, it means he has his facts. Now, the train service, they need to be clear about why they did not respond to that letter by the governor. The governor is the chairman of the State Security Council. He probably received intelligence. We're not sure from where he received that intelligence, but what he has said clearly is that his government did write a letter to the NRC asking that they should suspend services at night. Now, that is even beyond intelligence. That is a documented request to a government department asking that services should be suspended. So clearly, there is a failure, a negligence, an absence of responsibility by that arm of government. I believe that an investigation needs to be conducted into both the first incident that you referred to, which happened in October 2021, and then this current incident that happened on Monday night. In both instances, a forensic investigation, which private concerns like ours have conducted, shows that there is a huge level of negligence by certain departments in government, and that kind of negligence should not be allowed to go unpunished. Several people lost their lives in this last incident. Their families are currently mourning, and so if someone who was supposed to act didn't act, then that person should be held accountable.
The Minister of Transportation, Rotimi Amechi, had said that, well, there was a process for getting funds to get some surveillance equipment, particularly to survey the rail tracks from Abuja to Kaduna and monitor the movement of the train and its passengers, and that was stalled, and that was part of what led to this. I know that you have said already that that would only have been, even if they had those equipment, would have been only one layer of what was required to safeguard this train services and other such infrastructure right across the country. But barely 24 hours after the main incident occurred, that same track was under attack again. So one is wondering, there seems to be some gap between what we think we ought to be doing and what the bandits or terrorists have actually set out to achieve as objectives using this infrastructure.
Exactly, and it is from that prism I'm looking at that statement by the minister. With due respect to him, he should probably look at the security arrangement around our transportation infrastructure, not just the rail line. If that is the kind of advice he's getting is relating to only surveillance, then clearly something is wrong with the capacity and the capability of the department that is advising him. Security is implemented in layers. Surveillance only fits into one component of that layer, and that is the intelligence component. And even in that intelligence component, it's not the only layer. There are several aspects of intelligence that surveillance would either corroborate or support. So to that extent, there are huge gaps that even if you have an effective surveillance capability, like what the minister is suggesting, those gaps can still be exploited. Like you rightly indicated, while we were busy mourning what happened on Monday, there was another attack. So for me, the most important thing is to go after the threat factor. If you have identified the threat factor, which we have identified, these are gunmen that are operating within that area, then what is stopping us from going after them? I know that's not the responsibility of the minister, but he's a member of the government. He's also a cabinet member. And frankly, that statement by him appears to me to be an expression of frustration with a system that he belongs to. And it also speaks perhaps to some differences of opinion within the Federal Executive Council. And I believe that as a government, that needs to be clarified. Now, having said that, what is stopping us from going after the threat factor in this instance? Like I mentioned earlier on, these are gunmen that are operating within that region. Now, that forest around the rail track goes through about 5 states. On the left-hand side, it goes to Niger State. On the right-hand side, it goes through Kaduna State itself, Katsina, Zamfara, to an extent Sokoto and Kebbi State. And if you even extend further, it reaches into Niger Republic. So clearly, it is not something that one state can take care of. It is something that collaborative action between the 5 states, or 6 states if you want to add Niger State to it, as well as the federal government and the Republic of Niger. So very good that the president of Niger visited Nigeria, and one of the things he discussed was this banditry and security and how to challenge it. So as a way forward, first off, we need to occupy these ungoverned spaces, this forested area where these gunmen hide and operate and use to conduct their activities. By occupying that, we are denying them space to operate. Second off, we need to enhance our collaboration and partnership with our neighboring country, Niger, so that we block their capacity to come in with weapons and their capacity to run away whenever we are going after them. Anything short of that, honestly, is just cosmetic surgery. So a surveillance system is just a minute component of any security arrangement. Perhaps if time allows, we can look in details into what an in-house security arrangement within the Railway Corporation that will be supported by the public security arrangement. That is when you talk of a good security system. A surveillance will not solve the problem at all.
We will talk about that, and I guess that time will permit us to do so. But before we get to that, one thing that seems to run through all of this, and when I say all of this, after the first train attack, there was a second train attack. Then there was an attack in Zaria. Then there were some people who were killed while they were trying to flee bandits in Niger. That's Niger State, rather, and so on. And then there was the attack in Nnewi, which is further south, and so on. So one thing that seems to run through all these attacks, and going back, tracking back even as far back as the Chibok attack, where those unfortunate young ladies were kidnapped, is that the host communities, the surrounding communities in where all these attacks take place, seem to just be mum. They don't let people, the security agencies, it seems, know when these things are happening. For example, it isn't possible for 300 people on motorbikes to drive through an area where there are communities, and nobody will see them, either going or coming back after they've done the attacking. And yet, actionable intelligence, if we are to believe what the security forces tell us, It's very thin on the ground. So to what do you put this? If we take that area where this train is, to where this train line is as a point, what can you say about the communities in that area? You've already described it. Niger State is there, Zamfara State is there, Sokoto State is there, Kaduna State is there. One other thing all these states have in common is that they are all having security challenges anyway already.
The analogy that I would give in response to your question is like a farmer who plants crops, nurtures those crops, and then at the time of harvest, leaves the crops to wither away. Intelligence can only be harvested through the gathering of information. And in public intelligence, the gathering of that information is determined by the focus of the recipient of that intelligence. So if, for instance, the public intelligence department have a perception that the interest of the recipient is something else, that is where their focus would be. If they have an understanding that public interest, like what you've described, is what would interest the recipient of that information, then they will focus their collection. And I'll quickly explain what I mean. As a private practitioner, before I came into your studio, I have information which can be translated, because once you verify it, it becomes intelligence. A particular route currently, as you and I are discussing, in Zamfara State is being attacked by bandits. This is around 11 a.m. They have blocked that route, and they are currently carrying out that attack. Now, that is intelligence. I can share that intelligence with the public security departments. They are the ones that have responsibility to go out and ensure that either they arrest those bandits, or where they resist arrest, they kill them. But this is live, it's happening at the moment. Now, the next point to talk about is response to that intelligence. So collection is one aspect. Analyzing that intelligence is one component. Then the dissemination of that intelligence is the last component. And then, of course, the use of that actionable intelligence. Now, in all of this, in my honest opinion, being a practitioner, even though I'm in the civil space, there are issues with them. When it comes to collection, I've talked about priority. We need to refocus that priority. Our national interest should be driven by the feelings of our people. At the moment, if you are a journalist, if you ask your correspondent in Kaduna to go to Giwa local government, there are IDPs that are crying. If you sit down with them and debrief them, the intelligence you will harvest from them would be enough to at least go a long way towards reducing or solving this challenge that we have in the moment. Second point is accountability, where that intelligence is shared, and then those that are responsible or that are meant to use that intelligence to address what the issue is and don't, then they shouldn't be allowed to carry on with business as usual. So in a nutshell, the intelligence is there, but it needs to be harvested. There is no way, like you rightly said in your question, in this last attack, at least based on my interaction. By the way, I'm helping the families of about 3 victims. My consultancy is helping the families of 3 victims to rescue them from the hands of the abductors. So I know quite a lot based on my interaction with some of these families and then some of the victims. The attackers came in vehicles. We're not sure of the number of vehicles, but it's between 5 or thereabout. And then before that time, they actually did some form of surveillance to determine the exact point where they wanted to carry out that attack. Beyond that, they took their time, they planted an IED on the rail line. Now, all of these are information that if we were interested, first, before the incident, we would have harvested that intelligence, and that would have now meant actionable intelligence, where with that information, you give it to the public security agencies. The simplest thing to have done at that time was to make a call to the railway corporation, stop that train from moving because there is danger on that right now. We didn't do that. We allowed it to happen. Now, post-intelligence gathering, several things, I don't want to speak on public about them, but there is so much that we can do in terms of harvesting the intelligence post the incidents that unfortunately I don't see us doing. Ladi, one of the shocking things at the moment is that there is no center that has been established like it would have happened in any part of the world to meet the needs of either the victims or their family members who at the moment are in trauma and that require that kind of center to provide either information for them or in some level of psychosocial support. Now, I know that the State Emergency Management Agency in Kaduna has set up some form of mini center, but I'm talking of a widespread emergency response center like you would see in other parts of the world when such incident of such magnitude happen. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. So all of these layers that I've mentioned would have provided us with the kind of post-incident intelligence gathering capacities and capabilities that would allow for an uncovering of what happened and then why it happened, and then more importantly, the evidence that we need to prosecute those that were responsible. The forensic evidence that are abound in that train, I didn't, in fact, I saw that evidence being tampered with when several government officials visited the point zero. We should have cordoned off that point zero. We should have asked forensic experts to go there and gather the remnants of the bomb and several other things that would have been used as evidence. All of this should have, would have formed the kind of intelligence that in my mind I'm thinking about.
It's frightening because I have to take you back to what you talked about earlier, the layers, and when you were wondering if we would have the time to take a slightly deeper look at it. I think we should, precisely because there are so many targets now right across the country that can be attacked in the way that this train was attacked. And some of them are signature projects that this administration prides itself as having put in place over the last couple of years. And given that kind of scenario, we have early warning now with this Kaduna train attack about this. So perhaps you could now address the issue of how do we secure this critical infrastructure and ensure that those who use it, in this case the train, but then there are other such infrastructure right across the country, and then the issue of the roads, the airports, because let's not forget that before this attack on the train in Kaduna, there was an attempted attack on the Kaduna airport where the bandits were said not to have been able to gain access to the airport itself, but they did kill, going by the reports, 1 or 2 people, and in fact physically prevented a plane from taking off during that attack, during that visit. So that's an example of what I'm talking about. What can we do now, even with all the gaps that we have already established, to fix this?
Number one is to improve accountability within the security architecture in the country. My consultancy last year documented about 9,000 deaths in the country. And unfortunately, not a single person was held accountable for those 9,000 deaths. Ladi, we can't continue like that as a country. When 9,000 citizens die and not one person is held accountable, that's not good enough. So that's number one. We need to improve accountability. And there are 2 major levels of this security arrangement. Let's start with the organization itself. In this instance, we're discussing NRC. I'm not comfortable or impressed with the security capability or the security governance structure within the Railway Corporation. I have been fortunate enough to have conducted an assessment of at least the route between Abuja and Kaduna. And I know, to be fair to them, they tried. I know that there were certain levels of security, internal security arrangement. I'm told that there is a senior ranking police officer that is heading the security department within the NRC. Then there is also the SSS, senior ranking SSS officer that has been deployed to support the NRC. But beyond that, for the security management governance system to be effective, it has to be able to deter the threat element within this environment. Now, the threat element, as an example that we know, there are gunmen who come sometimes on 30 bikes with sometimes an AK-47. Each of that AK-47 has 2 magazines, and that means 60 bullets. Now, what I know for a fact is that on each train service, and I'm mindful not to say too much because this is a public forum, let's say there are 10 policemen on the train, 2 per wagon or per coach, as an example, and then each of them has at most an AK-47 with either 1 magazine or 2 magazines, and then they are made to confront or deter this other threat element that I mentioned that come on 50 bikes sometimes with 60 magazines. Clearly, it's not adequate. In security management, you have to have at least 4 times the level of firepower that your enemy would have. So if I'm protecting a facility, what I should have should be at least 4 times more than what the enemy has. And that for me is the simple answer to your question. We should conduct our assessment in a manner that is scientific and that allows us to address the issue using the 4 layers of security that first seeks to identify, and then to deter, and to deny, or to delay, where the issue is one that you can achieve by delaying. Now, let me give you a scenario and it will explain what I'm trying to say. Let's assume we install what the minister said we're going to install, which is the sensors. And then these guys, who come on their bikes, stay about 30 kilometers away, and then use their RPG, whatever it is that they have, and then shoot at that train. They would have succeeded in immobilizing that train. What they would do after they immobilize it is to come and then pick whoever they want to pick from that train. So clearly, what is appropriate is an assessment that understands the threat factor and then that puts in place a security mechanism that is commensurate to the threat factor. And when you are doing that, you should do it for the immediate threat as well as the future threat. That means, for instance, you should be able to anticipate the growth of that threat. If right now they are using AK-47s and RPGs, what is stopping them from using drones to deploy whatever IED that they want to deploy in the future? So whatever arrangement you put in place should be commensurate. And that brings me to the next point. The in-house security arrangement within our infrastructure should be supported by the public security arrangement. And that means, for instance, the response mechanism and capabilities of the public security department should be speedy enough to reinforce the capabilities that are in that train, as an example. And in security practice, that response mechanism should be something between 2 minutes and 7 minutes. Anything above that 7 minutes, unfortunately, would not be good enough. And so that means we should look at the rail track, see where there are security formations, and where to take those security formations longer than that 2 to 7 minutes, then we should have other arrangement. It could be, for instance, in terms of rapid deployment of, let's say, helicopters or other forms of reinforcement that would deter a would-be enemy or perpetrator to target a particular infrastructure. Now, I'm just using the Railway Corporation as an example. We need to do that for all our critical infrastructure. I'm aware that in the past, the SSS has attempted to do that. We also have an emergency preparedness policy in the country. Now, this is the time to pick up those documents and see whether they are relevant to our current situation. Are they good enough for the threat that we have within those environments? If they are not good enough, then we need to review them and make sure they are good enough. But it's absolutely important in my closing comments to mention that all of this has to be done in concentric cycles. You can't just look at one infrastructure and say, okay, you are doing everything that I've mentioned for. No, especially for the public security arrangement, there is not enough resources to do it for just one. So perhaps drawing a radius or a perimeter cycle around, let's say, a state like Kaduna, what kind of concentric cycles of security would these public departments put in place that would ensure, if I have a school, if I have, I'm a manager of a railway corporation and I'm in distress, by the time I call them, they would deploy to me within 2 to 7 minutes. Then I can give them a thumbs up. Anything short of that, unfortunately, would still allow gaps that will be exploited. And in conclusion, the focus that we give on the military should be changed. The military, yes, they are an integral component of any security arrangement, but they are not the only ones. There are other 27 ministry departments and agencies in security that can complement this concentric cycle that I mentioned. So again, it starts with the organization itself, and then it's complemented by the public security department.
What is the strategic importance, shall we say, because these attacks seem to have sprouted all of a sudden within and around Kaduna, the Kaduna airport, the Abuja-Kaduna train. We knew earlier on about the continuous, constant attacks on the Abuja-Kaduna highway, which was why the train became so attractive. And then, so one is wondering, is there anything that makes Kaduna particularly strategic in terms of someone who wants to gain a military advantage under any circumstance that you can think of?
In simple terms, there may be a political dimension to all of this. First off, Kaduna, as you know, occupies a strategic position in northern Nigeria. It was the capital of the then northern region, and virtually every northerner sees Kaduna as the regional hub. It's either he or she has a house there or has some investments or other interests in Kaduna. That's one. So that provides a political incentive. Number two, the governor has, of recent times, indicated interest in pursuing political, offices beyond where he is at the moment. The level of grievance that he has also generated as a result of some of his policies in the state would also provide fodder for anyone who wants to, create the kind of unfortunate situation that we have at the moment. Now, beyond that, this political dimension, the fact that Kaduna kind of links several states in the north. I mentioned earlier on that there is a forest that traverses about 5 to 6 states within the north central and northwestern axis. Now, anyone who has an interest in quote-unquote sabotaging this current government and targets Kaduna would have succeeded to a larger extent in achieving that objective. Lastly, then if security has been politicized like it has been, one of the easiest ways to show the weakness, as it were, of this current government is to attack Kaduna and show that that attack has been successful. It would have reduced, the three-pronged approach by this government when it says that one of the things it hopes to achieve is to, tackle security challenges within the country. So definitely, all of this provide incentives, as it were, or motives for anyone who has a political objective, either at the state level or at the federal level. But having said that, there are other factors too that make Kaduna predisposed to this. Number one is the ungoverned spaces that exist in Kaduna. Now, it can be argued that they are not as much as the ones in Niger, but then when you add the other factors I've mentioned and situate it with this likelihood that there is a political angle to all of this, then these ungoverned spaces now make it very easy for anyone who wants to use Kaduna. The second point is the level of grievances that I mentioned earlier on. Some of these grievances are political, others are economic, while the others are social. So it's very easy, for instance, to recruit from all of these elements and achieve whatever it is that who the perpetrator would want to achieve. And then lastly, the weaknesses within the security arrangement that I've mentioned. There is all the 27 ministries and departments, none of them has been mandated to occupy these ungoverned spaces. The only one that has the constitutional mandate for occupying these ungoverned spaces, which is in the Ministry of Agriculture, unfortunately does not have the capacity to do that. These are forest rangers. Most of them are not armed, and even where they are armed, they are disdain guns that they use. They don't even have vehicles and all that. So all of these gaps, unfortunately, make Kaduna a likely target for anyone who wants to achieve what we're seeing in the last few months and weeks in Kaduna.
Many of the things that you have spoken about already are fairly either medium term or long term, and you've alluded to that when you said many of them cannot be implemented immediately. So I want to use the balance of time that we have to take a look at what we can do. I've read some reports already, even within the last couple of days, which have made some suggestions. Some are even referring to things that were alleged to have already been done. And I wonder, you being an expert and all, if some of these things, so I'm going to put them before you. The first is that there were those who said, and I use the word alleged because I haven't been able to independently verify that when the train service started, the trains were being accompanied by the Air Force between Abuja and Kaduna and back. And that weather, as well as other factors, made that difficult to continue with. There were also others who talked about setting up of military bases within Qatari and Rijana in Kaduna as being some of the more permanent solutions, but that for now, forward operating bases could be immediately put on ground in those two areas. If we take just those two first, do you think this is viable? I mean, if we could return to the Air Force accompanying the trains, I don't know how viable that is.
They are not sustainable measures, frankly, and all they will serve is to do, a temporary stoppage of the attacks. But even beyond that, what will likely happen is that these bandits or gunmen would now look at other targets, and there are so many targets that they are available for them. My honest solution is simple, and if we're able to do this, believe me, it will end this in a very short time. And my solution is not just focused on the rail line. It's a solution that is focused on everywhere, actually, that will bring all of this to an end. With due respect, I'm calling on Mr. President to issue a tasking order to the various security departments, especially the intelligence department. That tasking order should be for them to identify, just like it's mentioned in our National Counterterrorism Strategy and our Terrorism Prevention Act, they should identify who are these gunmen and bring their pictures, their profiles to him. And this tasking should be achieved in 1 month, 4 weeks. And once they do that, he should authorize the publication of these profiles and pictures. Let every Nigerian know who these people are. And once that is done, the second component of that is that the Mr. President should issue a directive that those persons must be arrested by these 27 ministries, departments, and agencies. Once they, and that order should include a second clause where they resist arrest, then all the powers at the disposal of the security department should be used, and that includes the possibility of killing them. And this order should be time-framed. It should be achieved within 2 months. So that means within 3 months, this issue can be brought to an end. And at the end of this period, any ministry, department, and agencies that fail to achieve this presidential directive should be either changed, or if, in fact, in certain instances, if it's caught that there is an element of negligence by that department, he or she should be tried. And for us to achieve this, and this is now my third recommendation, we should strengthen monitoring and evaluation of those security departments. When Mr. President has issued these directives in the past, but they were never implemented, that is because there was no monitoring and evaluation. So the coordinating elements within the security departments should enhance the monitoring and evaluation. And that means they should develop key performance indicators from these two presidential directives. Those key performance indicators should be measurable so that within a week, they should identify which of these departments are fulfilling that directive. If there are reasons why they are not fulfilling them, they should be able to support them. And that brings me to the role of the parliament. The parliament has a key role in this regard to achieve this objective. If Mr. President decides to follow this advice that I'm giving, they need to look at their oversight functions of these various departments and make sure that these directives are implemented. Believe me, Ladi, if we do this in 3 months, we would end all of this.
You're not the only one who has said this, but I know that you have been one of those who said this, and it was you didn't say it just now, and that had to do with the fact that all this banditry or terrorism, depending on what you want to call it, might be one of the stumbling blocks in the run-up to the 2023 elections, which brings into it a sense of urgency about tackling it, which is why the measures you're talking about, you and I are talking about, and others are talking about, are critical, because in many of these places, including the ungoverned spaces that you referred to earlier on, we're expected to have elections in those places, general elections, in less than a year. So if we can't get to those places, if those places are not under control and having people moving about their daily activities, how can we conduct elections in those places? You've also alluded to the fact that, of course, some of these grievances may have political undertones. So that, again, then means that all of the solution is not all having to do with security. So I want you to speak to that part of it, because very often you find that some of these problems may perhaps resolve themselves if some of the grievances that brought them about in the first place were addressed.
No, definitely. With the first part of your question, INEC has already, and in fact, Mr. President himself at one point last year admitted that the politicization of security. INEC too has issued a statement, expressing its concern that insecurity is one of the major issues that it's concerned about with regards to its preparation for the 2023 elections. Now, I know that there is an interagency consultative committee on electoral security, and that committee is co-chaired by both the Office of the National Security Advisor and then the Inspector General of Police. What worries me is that these departments are the departments that have responsibility. So if my recommendation of the 3 months time frame that I mentioned, if that recommendation is followed, then it means we have the possibility of at least containing and reducing these issues to allow for some form of elections to take place in those locations. If, however, that is not done, then it's likely that we're going to face a situation like what we saw in the Northeast, where elections are actually held in IDP camps. Before I came into the studio, I looked at the National Commission for Refugees and the distribution of IDPs across the country. We're looking at about 4 million Nigerians that are displaced, and these are informal camps, 80% of which are in northern Nigeria. That poses a challenge. Does INEC have the capacity in such a short time to organize elections in IDP camps? And then what of the integrity of those elections? Will the state government that are controlling these camps now have more influence over those that are staying in the camps? Because, of course, they are feeding them and providing for them and other activities. So there are so many components to this that we need to address. So at the center of all of this is good governance. If we can improve on our governance structures, most grievances would go away. There are several states in the country where, frankly, the level of grievances within communities is palpable and is worrisome. And so at the center of it really is improving on governance, not just at the federal level, but at the state level. If you look at the Human Development Index in the country, in certain parts of the country, the poverty level, the unemployment rate, the grievances that are driven by inter-community violence, where peace-building mechanisms have failed, or perhaps there was never even any attempt to do that. And honestly, this is not related to just one region, it's across the country entirely. So yeah, good governance is at the center of this. And the good thing is we have an opportunity as Nigerians. We're riding the drum beats of the 2023 elections have started. Anyone who voted on the basis of sentiment in 2019, now he has felt it, he or she has felt the consequence of his actions. And so we have an opportunity come the elections in 2023 to ask critical questions. And I must commend you, your station as a media channel, for beginning to evoke discussions around the kind of narratives that we want to see in 2023. These narratives should include issues that would foster us forward, that will address the drivers of insecurity in the country, issues around equity, issues around transparency, issues around diversity and acceptance or inclusion within the political space. For me, those are the things that hopefully the media space, civil society organizations will increase discussions around, so that the narrative around the elections will change. It's not just an individual coming up to say, vote me. No. What are you going to do around those things that I mentioned? How are you going to solve the security challenge? How are you going to reduce the level of national discord that exists at the moment, social cohesion that is at its lowest ebb? How are you going to solve it? So I'm hoping that all of this, if we enhance it, it would increase good governance and automatically reduce the grievances that provide the fodder and that are the drivers of insecurity within the country.
I want to kind of wind this down in the way that we began, and that is to return to the issue of coordination. Nigeria has a plethora of security agencies, and in fact, there are those who think or who say that people like you who are in the security business should have very little to do if all those agencies were extremely active and efficient and going about their business. You have intelligence agencies for the Army, for the Navy, for the Air Force. You have the Defense Intelligence Agency. You have the DSS. You've got military intelligence as well. I mean, a whole host of agencies. You've got the Civil Defense
Ladi,
Corps.
there are 27 of them.
So, I mean,
27 of them.
Doesn't, by the number itself, doesn't that introduce a problem, Dr. Adamu, of synergy and coordination by the sheer number of them? I mean, how do you coordinate 27 agencies with their own hierarchy, with their own ranking system, and with their own core mandates without some level of conflict, and then therefore everybody working in a silo?
So the numbers are not the challenge. What is the challenge is the absence of delineation of their functions. And then sometimes the fact that even when the functions are delineated, they are spread in different ministries. So let me quickly give an example. Policing has different aspects. And in Nigeria, you have security departments that are actually policing organizations, but are not part of the police. An example is the road safety. In other parts of the world, road safety elements are actually policing functions that are under one single police. Now, in the case of Nigeria, you have the police under the Ministry of Police Affairs. Then you have all the other policing departments that are now under the Ministry of Interior. So that is the number one challenge. The fact that these departments are under different ministries, it reduces the capacity and the capability for coordination. But having said that, our Constitution actually realized this and so provided avenues for coordination among these coordinating elements. And I'll quickly mention the coordinating elements within the security architecture. This is the Office of the National Security Advisor, that's the highest coordinating body. Then the ministry, well, the presidency actually, there are two departments under the presidency that have some elements of coordinating power. And then you have the Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Police Affairs. If I haven't mentioned Ministry of Interior, it's part of it. And I think there's one other, Ministry of Budgeting and Planning also has some element of coordination embedded in it. So all of these coordinating elements are meant to support the coordination of these 27 MDAs. But the challenge has always been that because they are disparate, all of them are kind of operating in silos, these 5 coordinating elements, and in certain instances, the individuality that are occupying those offices don't see eye to eye, and frankly, sometimes there is no love lost between them. So that element is completely missing. And this is what happened in the US before 9/11, and they realized it, and so they went ahead to make certain changes, including the introduction of Homeland Security. I think we need to enhance the governance structures within the security architecture to ensure that we have a standard unit. This is what the UK has as an example. They have a standards department that looks at all of these the security departments, and where there are failures, as an example, where they are operating in silos, then that standard department quickly steps in to correct it. Where there are gaps that exist, that standard department, reaches out to correct it. We don't need to recreate any new department. We can have that standard department embedded in perhaps either one of the ministries or the Office of the National Security Advisor. Then we also have councils on security. Unfortunately, in my experience, those councils have not been meeting as regularly as they should be meeting. So again, that's one other key area. And then lastly, I talked about earlier on the monitoring and evaluation. Those functions, those M&E functions within the security architecture will help us identify deviation from set goals, and then of course correct it as they happen. So in my honest opinion, it's not numbers that is lacking or that is creating the challenge. Is all of these things that I've mentioned, enhancing the governance structure, and then in certain instances appointing relevant persons. So if you look at the intelligence community, the Constitution says there should be ombudsmen appointed within that community. The role of that ombudsman is to identify some of these grievances and correct them. Till date, those ombudsmen have not been appointed. Since the intelligence departments were created in this country under the military era, no ombudsman has been appointed to occupy that position and play the role that they are playing. So again, it's not numbers, but the governance structures that are missing within the security architecture. I know some of what I've mentioned are a little bit high level, but this is a public forum, so I'm careful again not to say too much.
let's talk numbers of a different type. Now, that's the numbers of those who are actually doing the jobs, the boots on the ground. We've talked about 27 agencies, but if we just take the police, for example, it's very well known that there are about 400,000 policemen, of whom about 1/3 or half are doing non-core policing duties, as it is called. And you can say that the military now in operation in virtually every state of the country, instead of securing the borders, has also been stretched virtually to its limit. The same applies to many of these other agencies. So the numbers in terms of boots on the ground and how we either grow those numbers or make the existing numbers more effective, how do we go about that? What do we do in that regard?
First off is to put in place, I talked about M&E, and believe me, M&E, monitoring and evaluation, will solve a lot of these challenges. Are we making efficient use of the resources that we have? No, we are not. So that's number one, enhance the effective utilization of the resources at our disposal. The number of personnel that the police has, a significant number of them, some would say up to 50% of them are deployed in this non-policing function. I don't think they are non-policing functions, they are policing functions. It's only that that function has been capitalized. If you are a public office holder, if you are a commercial entity and you have money, then you can receive that. And the ordinary person, frankly, who doesn't have that kind of money doesn't get it. So essentially what we've done is we've capitalized or introduced capitalism into the policing function, which shouldn't be. Any effective utilization of our resources would mean using that concentric cycle I spoke about earlier on. Instead of now deploying to individuals, we are deploying along concentric cycles. If you are in Lagos, in Ikeja, instead of deploying, for instance, to a particular entity in Ikeja, what you've done is you've stationed police around the perimeter of Ikeja, and you've provided telephone numbers, and you know that within 2 to 7 minutes, those police can deploy and to any person within that perimeter that is in distress. And then who will now tell me we don't have enough resources? So introducing M&E, introducing technology that would allow us to indicate that distress in a speedy and transparent manner, and then introducing resources that for rapid deployment, police officers can't walk on their leg, to go from point A to point B in Ikeja in 2 to 7 minutes. We need resources to allow for that. So that kind of adequate use of resources that is meant to achieve a particular policing function, I think, is the way to go about it. I mentioned earlier on that there are about 7 departments in Nigeria that are carrying out policing functions. So how do we bring all of that 7 together to work as a whole? Again, it's about M&E, it's about coordination, it's about collaboration and cooperation among them.
Dr. Adamu, a grim situation we have discussed here. One can only hope that with some of the things that you have said and some of the things that that the situation on ground have brought to the fore, a lot more pinpoint attention will be brought to bear on some of these challenges. But I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
That's our program today. We would, of course, like to hear from you on the conversation. Our social media handles are right there on your screen. You can also listen to this and previous episodes of the program via our podcast. Please visit our website, channelstv.com, to get started. I am Ladi Akeredoluale. Goodbye.